Hi, this is Brian Bieron with PlatformEconomyInsights.com, and this briefing is to update you on what's happening in Australia with the ACCC and its digital platforms inquiry. This topic actually gets a lot of coverage at PlatformEconomyInsights.com because Australia, I think their government prides themselves on the fact that they are in the vanguard for imposing new regulatory limits and burdens on at least the largest digital platforms, and maybe by the end of this process, essentially all digital platform businesses. And so we're keeping track of it. They've earned it, to be honest. So really quickly, what's the ACCC? It's the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission. They are the competition law, the antitrust authority in Australia. Over a year and a half ago, they were tasked by the Australian government to do a review of the digital platform marketplace. They called it the Digital Platforms Inquiry. As I said, it's been over a year and a half long. They put out a final report back in July. The review is focused on, honestly, social media, digital communications, and its effect on the advertising market and traditional media in Australia. So the companies that are in the focus are, in particular, Facebook and Google, some Twitter as well. It doesn't look at other aspects of digital marketplaces and competition law that we're seeing emerge elsewhere in the world, which draws in companies like Amazon and Apple. It's really a Facebook and Google situation right now in Australia. The final report that came out in July, very lengthy, over 600 pages, included 23 specific recommendations that the ACCC is making, most of which now go to the Australian government, the Parliament, for example, to legislate. And in some cases, they apparently don't need legislation. They can be kind of regulatory changes. Following up on the final report being released, the Australian Treasury Department began a 12-week consultation process. The first 6 weeks were consultations where the government was taking submissions from interested parties. The second 6 weeks, which is apparently just beginning now, includes essentially conversations between the government and interested parties. So one of the things we have reported on at Platform Economy Insights, and so if you check our emails or our websites, you will see that there were submissions made by groups ranging from the Australian Catholic bishops, who, by the way, took a very negative tone about social media and platform companies. They were very aggressive and, in fact, mimicked in many ways the language of the Australian government and the ACCC, as well as most recently a submission that was reported from what's a group called Free TV, which is a trade association of the big broadcasters in Australia. As I mentioned, one of the things to keep in mind if you're looking at what's happening in Australia is a special focus on the impact on traditional media. So you have issues related to print journalism, as if that really hardly exists anymore, but I guess it's in print digitally. But you have print journalism, you have traditional television, you have traditional media in Australia believing that they've been meaningfully harmed by these big digital platforms, and the Australian government, through the ACCC, focused a lot of attention on those negative impacts. So it's both how the media industry now works and also how the advertising industry has been affected and how that's impacting traditional media. So you had those among many other submissions that very much supported many of the ACCC recommendations. You also had tech companies, including Facebook and Google, as well as tech trade associations that submitted on the other side, in many cases with concerns about specific recommendations, and in some cases also saying that some of the recommendations they felt like industry could really work with. So They're in this process now of consultation. Where it goes next is legislation. So we're going to have the Australian government have to take up many of these recommendations in some kind of legislative form. We'll see how that process works out. Needless to say, the specific recommendation has to then be implemented with legislative language itself, eventually regulation. It'll all get much more complicated, and we'll see the details at that point. That will take time. It's also worth keeping in mind that the Australian government is led by some people, starting with the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, who've been very willing to be highly critical of the big platforms. I won't go into detail here, but he has been more than willing to put personal responsibility on the platforms when bad things show up, essentially, in the news feeds, on the videos. He is very supportive of much more aggressive action by the big platforms on things like content moderation. And not only has Australia enacted a very strong content moderation law that tries to pin personal responsibility on the big platforms when abhorrent content shows up online, but he has advocated other countries doing the same thing. You also have the head of the ACCC, a gentleman named Rod Sims, who has been very willing to be personally very critical of the big platforms when they object to essentially outside pressures to change how they handle content moderation. So you've got an Australian government who politically clearly believes that being aggressive on these topics is politically a winner, and they're pushing hard. So that's why at Platform Economy Insights, we've been watching Australia pretty closely because they've really put themselves in the position of being a market leader on imposing new burdens and new regulations on the platform space, especially with social media and communications. And I can't help but mention that they were similarly kind of a market leader in terms of changing tax policy, imposing new burdens on commerce platforms when it comes to imposing taxes on out-of-country internet-enabled businesses, both for services and for goods. So Australia certainly looks to be making its name as a government leader in the industry of regulating digital platforms. So with that, this has been Brian Bieron with PlatformEconomyInsights.com, giving you an update on what's happening in Australia. There will be more to follow for sure. Thank you for listening. If you have questions, there's a link below to send a question in. Otherwise, until our next briefing, this is Brian Bieron. Bye-bye.